I enjoy coming to the second service because I'm usually in the first one. And it's been a while since I was here, and I see a number of new faces, and I say, oh, wow, that's wonderful. So my wife does real estate, and so often on Sundays she has open houses, and that's why we come to the earlier service. I actually go to another service later, which is an Hispanic service, because I'm trying to learn Spanish, okay? But for, as many of you know, for, about 24 years, my wife and I and family, we were in the Congo, and we worked there as missionaries. My wife was a medical doctor. Now she's a realtor. And I used to teach in a theological school, in a seminary. And when our children got to be, about college age, then we moved back to the States. We moved into this area. We're in Bloomfield and then now in Clifton. And so I decided, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And at that point, for a period of about 5 years, I worked with an organization called Church Resource Ministries. And this is a wonderful organization that does quite a number of different things, but the part that I was a part of was a small team, and we targeted churches that were in crisis. Okay, if a church, sometimes churches really go through crisis. There's some conflict, and they divide and split off, or the pastor, gets into some trouble, and half the congregation leaves, and so then they say to Church Resource Ministries, "Could you help us?" And so we do what they call an intentional interim pastorate. So I would become the pastor of this church for about a year or so, and we would, little by little, help them grieve the loss and work through their issues, identify their issues, figure out what they're going to do different, and really take a whole new look at who they are. What is our reason for being? Who are we trying to target? Maybe we began, 20, 30 years ago with a certain target, but now what's our target? And so this was a wonderful process of renewal. And then in 1 year, it was incredible what God would do. And we'd help them figure out what pastor would suit them, and then they would call him, and he would work with them. Well, in that process, I came across a tool which is called a movement actually called Natural Church Development, and I found that this tool is very useful. It was designed to help churches figure out, what their qualities are, how strong they are in different areas. It's rather easy to measure the level of a person's knowledge. They do it in school all the time. They give you a test to see how much you know, okay? But to measure qualities is really tough. For example, if you're going to measure the loving relationships in a congregation, how would you measure that? That is tough. And Christian Schwarz, he was a student, a German student at the School of Church Growth in California. And he was reading all these books about church growth. He discovered that there were hundreds of books about church growth. It seemed as if every pastor that was successful writes a book. And he says, this is what we did. And the implication is, if you do it, same thing will happen to you. But Christian Schwarz says, how do you know? How do you know that the principles that worked for you are universal? How do you know they'll work in another situation? And what he discovered was, out of these hundreds of books about church growth, there wasn't one that was based on research. And he says, I'm going to fill that gap. And so I assume it was for his doctoral thesis. He had a whole team of people, and they were trying to identify what are the essential elements to a healthy church. And so, I mean, there are churches that are growing, that aren't healthy. But what they discovered was that if a church is healthy in certain areas, it will be growing. And what they were trying to discover is what are the critical areas that are proven principles. What are the proven principles that are valid in any country of the world, in any church? So that's what they were after. And they used a tool. The tool is sort of a diagnostic survey. And there's about 90 questions, and they're trying to measure certain qualities. We'll talk about these qualities. It's sort of like taking a thermometer and measuring your temperature in 8 different areas. Because through this research project, they identified 8 key areas, 8 essential areas, which are essential to being healthy. And what they found is that they designed this, and then through that process, they perfected the tool. And there's about 90 questions, and they found that if you give this to 30 core people in a church, people that have been around, people that are involved more than just on Sunday, people who are in good standing with the church, any 30. I mean, if you have a church of 1,000 or 2,000 people, any 30 core people will come up with the same results. And so they gave this to 30 people in 1,000 different churches in 32 different countries. And through that, they perfected their tool, and they've continued to perfect it. This was since the 90s, I think. They've continued to perfect it. Now there's been about 65,000 churches that have taken the diagnostic tool. This is sort of like a self-evaluation. Schools, universities, etc. They periodically do self-evaluations. They say, where are we? Where are we strong? Where are we weak? What do we need to change? But often that's very subjective. And churches do this too. For 2,000 years they've been doing this. They get together and they say, well, where do you think we're weak? What do you think we should work on? And we come up with results, but they're very subjective, and they're not necessarily tied in with reality. And what this did for the first time, it permitted churches to get concrete evidence as to how strong or how weak they were in 8 different areas. And so this whole movement has increased. And when I go to, I went to the Congo a little less than a year ago, and we held seminars for pastors all around. And we were talking about these 8 essential elements. And, we would take about an hour on each one. It was sort of a 2-day seminar, and we would explain for half an hour, then we'd break up into groups, and they would discuss, and we'd give them questions to work through, and so on. And, it was as if the Africans, we'd given them a new pair of glasses, and they were looking at the church for the first time through these glasses, and they said, "Oh, my goodness, is that where we're at?" And, unfortunately this morning, I can only give you about 2 or 3 minutes on each of the 8, okay? So it'll be totally inadequate. But we do have, this booklet called The ABCs of Natural Church Development, which some of the ushers will have, and they'll be on the tables back yonder. And we encourage you to grab one. They're just 30 pages long, and they're written in a popular fashion. And it goes into some of the theory behind, what makes for a healthy church. And then this is the original book that Christian Schwarz wrote called Natural Church Development, a guide to 8 essential qualities of healthy churches. And there's a lot more here than we'll even touch on today. And, my wish is that we have at least 10 people in our congregation who read this. We do have an implementation team that's already chosen 8 people, and we'll be introducing them to you in a minute. And at the end of this period, I'll end a little early, and we'll have questions. We'll be up here, and you can ask us any questions you want, because to try to explain this clearly in half an hour is really difficult. But often through questions, you clarify things. So the 8 people on this implementation team, they either have or are reading this, and they find that it's a little heavy, right? But it's readable. And I think that the more people in a congregation who have an in-depth understanding of the church and what it means to be a healthy church, is good for any church. And so let me move on to talking about the 8 essential elements of a healthy church. And I think we have a diagram there, okay? And in your bulletin, we put it as well so that you can take it home and maybe put it on your refrigerator and look at it 100 times over the next year, okay? Because these elements, you learn to see the church through this grid, and it says a lot. And you'll discover that the things that I mention, are rooted in Scripture. We don't have the time to go into each one and show how it's rooted in Scripture, but each one of these elements is rooted in Scripture, and it's also rooted in reality, the way God has made us and the way churches function, so that these represent the 8 proven principles that apply globally. So Christian Schwarz, he didn't arrange them in any order. He just put them out there. And I say, oh my goodness, how am I going to remember that? So I put it into a diagram, so you can blame me for the diagram. And this sort of for me, it makes sense, and I can remember it. And it's in the shape of a church. And the first three elements we'll look at are foundational. These are general things that are foundational for a healthy church. What they discovered was that in healthy churches, there's passionate spirituality. They're characterized by passionate spirituality. People are on fire. They're passionate about their faith. They're involved. They do things wholeheartedly with enthusiasm and with joy. They find that legalistic churches who take this diagnostic, they don't figure very high on passionate spirituality. It's really hard to be passionate about rules, okay? And Jesus talked about this, in Revelation when he's addressing churches. To one church he said, he says, you've left your first love. To another one, he said, you're neither hot nor cold, you're lukewarm. I'd rather if you were either hot or cold. And Jesus summarized the law as love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. Okay? And so God expects us to be passionate when we really understand and we've experienced. It's hard to follow somebody who's not passionate about what he's doing. And so churches that are really passionate about God and obeying God and so on, people are drawn to that. The second quality, foundational quality, is inspiring worship services. The people in these churches find that their experience in the worship service is very edifying, very inspiring. They go to church not because they have to, but because they want to. And I remember this one church in Bunia, in the Congo, where I was when I went the first time, 2 years ago. It's really quite a large church. You have about 1,000 or more people. and they have a first service is in Swahili, and the second service was in French. And so I was going to go to the French one, but I waited. I got there a little bit early, and all these people gathered around the church, scores and scores of people waiting to go in. And as soon as the Swahili service got out, they rushed in. And it was as if in 5 minutes the whole place was full. And I thought, wow. And this pastor, he has intentionally, stressed these 8 essential elements. And he's developed a worship service which is really inspiring. I might just say that, I think that we have a wonderful, inspiring worship service here. And when we talk about 8 essential elements, when we talk about doing a diagnostic, we're not saying that Montclair Community Church is sick. No. Even healthy churches can become healthier. Every healthy church has its weakest point, always. And so you can keep on growing. And that's the idea here. Okay, then the third foundational element is called loving relationships. And here, there's a sincere and practical love between the people in the church. And this is a powerful magnet which draws people to Christ. There's nothing like a congregation which demonstrates loving relationships for drawing people to Christ. It's far more effective than some program of evangelism. Now, there's good programs of evangelism and they're necessary, but it's these loving relationships that draw people. And they discovered that healthy churches have loving relationships. And Jesus talked about this. Jesus said, by this shall all men know that you're my disciples because you love one another. He even said, by this you'll know, people will know that the Father sent the Son into the world because of your unity and your love for one another. In other words, that love and that unity is the most powerful apologetic for the truth of Christianity that there is. And so the third quality was loving relationships. Now, in this church in Bunya that I was talking about, after, the Congo has gone through a lot of conflict recently, and after the worst of it, the town of Bunya was sort of at the eye of the storm in terms of 2 tribes that were fighting and killing each other. And as people, as things started settling down, they started coming back to town. People were very edgy about, where they went to church. What church should I go to? Oh, my people are over there, and they would go to that church, that has their tribe, etc. And this pastor, Alio, he said, we discovered that there was all this feeling in the congregation, and we wanted to break it down. So they focused on cultivating loving relationships. And one of the things that they did was they had a Christmas exchange to try and get people together. And how these go, you give your number and you get a number and you don't know who you're giving to or who you're getting from. But so they did this. And there was a fellow that came and he was an orphan. And he didn't have much money, but he bought a toothbrush. Okay, and he came with his toothbrush. And he was teamed up with a merchant that was really quite well off, and he came with a cell phone. Okay? And so they exchanged. And this merchant got thinking. He said, I think that maybe God put us together. And that merchant decided that he was going to support, pay the school fees for this, orphan, and he paid it all the way through university. And it's, there's all kinds of things that a church can do to encourage and increase loving relationships. Okay, so those are the 3 foundational, passionate spirituality, inspiring worship, loving relationships. Then, as walls, I put two things that I think really build up the church. One is need-oriented evangelism. The other is gift-oriented ministry. Let's talk about need-oriented evangelism first. The idea here is that these healthy churches, they do evangelism, but they do it by attacking people problems, needs that are in the community. And as they focus on these needs, they're introducing people to Jesus as well. Just like, maybe the need in our community is loving relationships between couples. And so we offer a training on how to improve your relationship. And non-Christians benefit from it as well, and they come and they get to know you and they get to like it, and they discover that Jesus has something to do with our loving relationships. So, and they become believers. So there's this need-oriented evangelism. And Jesus practiced that. Jesus, he healed people, he cast out demons, and he preached the kingdom. He came to the woman at the well, and he said, I can give you living water. She says, living? Really? I wouldn't have to come back? And he said, go call your husband. And she says, well, I don't have one. And he knew, he said, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with now is not your husband, which demonstrates that you have a lot of thirst. And I came to quench your thirst, in essence, he was saying. So he practiced need-oriented evangelism. These churches that are sensitive to the question of evangelism, they know that, according to the experience of researchers like Christian Schwarz, about 1 Christian in 10 has the gift of evangelism. Now, everybody has a responsibility to, in some way or other, propagate the good news of Jesus. But there's just about 1 in 10, 10%, that really are good at this. That kind of person? They just know how to connect with people. They know how to share their faith without, offending anybody. And they know how fast to go and how slow to go and all of that. And they lead people to Christ, left over right. And but in these churches, they say, okay, who in our congregation has the gift of evangelism? Oh, that one. But that one is already doing so much. Well, let's help him get rid of all those other responsibilities so that he can do what he's gifted at, you see? And so they stress evangelism, need-oriented evangelism. Then the other wall represents gift-oriented ministry. And I think we have, okay. So many churches function this way. The pastor is at the front, or the elders are at the front pulling, and the congregation is at the back pushing, and it is rough going. And the problem is that the wheels are square. And Christ has given to the church all the gifts they need. All the wheels that are round are inside. But you have to get them from the inside onto the right places. And once you get the right people in the right places with the right gifts, it's wonderful how things go. And so healthy churches are aware that the Bible teaches that every Christian has a spiritual gift. And they're aware that it's the responsibility of the leaders to help people identify their spiritual gifts and help equip them and mobilize them in the use of those gifts. And that makes for a healthy, growing church. Some of you, maybe are used to planting plants and cultivating them and so on. Well, any plant, if it grows, it's not because it's not you that made it grow. It's God that made it grow, okay? But you have a lot to do about how well it grows, whether or not the soil is fertile, whether or not there's enough water, whether or not there's enough sunshine, and all of that affects the growth. And the same is true And Christian Schwarz points this out. He says, in terms of the church, it's only God that can grow a church. It's only God that can bring people into the kingdom and build them up and grow them. But we have a lot of responsibility to do everything that's necessary to maximize his growth. So as we help people discover their gifts and set them loose to do that, it makes a huge difference. And the New Testament has several passages on spiritual gifts, how every Christian has a spiritual gift, and we need to discover them and use them. Okay, then on the other, let's see, that's the two walls, right? Now we get to the ceiling. So, and this, I put as ceiling because they sort of point forward, how you're going to move and what direction you're going to move. And on the one hand, there's empowering leaders. Healthy churches have a philosophy of empowering leaders. Their leaders believe that their first task, their priority task, is to empower other people. They know how to come along somebody who's a new Christian maybe and help them grow in their Christian life. And then help them identify their gifts and begin to use them and develop. They pour their lives into people. And they pour their lives into people not so that I might have a good team. That happens often. But even if the person grows to their maximum and God calls them to something else, they're happy about that because they're doing it for the good of the person rather than for the good of my team. Okay? So there's empowering leaders. And I think that Jesus is the best example of this. Jesus, he had a public ministry, but he had, he worked with the 12, and he was developing them, and he was empowering them. And then Paul, he functioned the same way. He cultivated young men, and he empowered them. Okay, the other side of the roof is functional structures. And here, often people don't think that structures, organization, that's the opposite of spiritual. It's not. God believes in structures. If you look at the way God created the universe in Genesis 1 and 2, you realize, and all you have to do is look at the trees and learn a little about science, and you realize that God is into structures. And then he brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, and they were just this huge crowd of people. And God organizes them into where they're to live and what tribe they're related to and where they should bring their problems. And they had a whole system of things, and they had rules and regulations and laws, civil laws and religious laws that helped structure the nation of Israel. And so they find that, Christian Schwarz found that this is one of the qualities of a healthy church, is that their structures are functional. In other words, the way you structure things is designed to get you to your goal. And we often forget that. We often get stuck in the rut. We often start saying, well, this is our structure. We don't do it that way around here. Or, we never did it that way before. And that shows that there's not functional structures. These healthy churches, they're constantly revising their constitution because they know that as things change, they need to change the structure in order to best realize their objective. There are many churches. I forget who said, but they said, we met the enemy and the enemy was us. And very often the church's first enemy is itself. And one way we express this is by our structures sometimes hold people back rather than facilitate their growth and their ministry. And then the last of the 8 essential elements is called holistic small groups. And healthy churches have a lot of holistic small, they believe in the importance of holistic small groups. And what do we mean by holistic? Holistic is, you can have, for example, a Bible study that's purely Bible study. That's not holistic. But when the Bible study meets and they discuss the Bible, and then they pray for one another, and they worship, and they're aware of each other's problems, and they're helping each other throughout the week, that's holistic. And Christian Schwarz said that from his research, if there was one out of the 8 that was more important than the others, it would be this one, holistic small groups. Because it's in that setting that people learn how to be a disciple of Jesus and how to serve him. And it's in that setting that they discover their gifts, their spiritual gifts, and they start using them. I don't know if you've been in groups, and so-and-so, every time he contributes, you say, wow, that was really rich, that was really good. He has a gift of teaching maybe. And there's somebody else there who never speaks, but you know that during the week, he's following up on people, and he knows their needs, their problems, what they're struggling with, and he's helping them. He has the gift of helps. And so it's in this context of small groups that people discover their gifts and develop and put to use their spiritual gifts. Okay, so where are we? With natural church development, what they do is they first give the diagnostic, and through that you get a portrait of yourself. And nobody can say, well, that's not us. These guys came from the outside and they analyzed us and they got it wrong. You can't say that because that is what you said we look like, okay? So you can't argue with that. And what they've discovered is that any 30 core people will come up with the same results, okay? So, and that's one of the things we're going to do. We're going to do the 30 questionnaires, and during this week, somebody will contact you if you've been chosen to be somebody to fill in the questionnaire, okay? And I hope you'll participate because we want to see how you see, our church. And, if you're not asked, don't be offended by it. There's probably 100 people that qualify, to do this. And then we send the questionnaires off to Natural Church Development Office in Chicago, and they put it into a computer, and they feed out our portrait. And it's not just a picture of a graphic picture. Maybe there's a graphic picture coming up. Okay, there's a graphic picture. So you see, this church, ended out being that way. And the water, the liquid level is determined by the shortest slat. I don't know if you remember those pickle barrels that were made out of wood. And each of these slats represents the 8 essential elements. And the lowest slat, the weakest point, is the level of the congregation. If you want to grow, you need to build that up. And that's the whole idea between, of the minimum factor. And, this sort of represents that. There's 8 essential elements. And we'd like to know where we're strong. We'd also like to know where we're weak, because you can maximize the energy you put into something if you focus it on where we're weak to make it stronger. So in the next 2 Sundays after church, we will be asking people to take this survey, okay? You'll find out about it during the week. And, and you can choose next Sunday or the following Sunday if you're willing to participate. And we'll have a place to do that. And in 2 weeks flat, we'll have everything ready to send in, okay? And it won't take long, and a couple weeks later, they'll give us the results. So by then, it's almost Christmas time. So we won't, bother you too much, but we will, begin to study this at the leadership level, and we'll also share with you the results so you can begin to think about that. Okay, then in January, we'll have a couple sessions where we get a lot of people together, and we say, okay, our weakest point is, let's say it's holistic small group. Suppose, and then we say, well, why is it that we are weak here? And you have everybody who writes down, on 5 little cards, why they think we're weak here. And you put up on a wall and you discover the clusters, and you discover, oh, most people agree that this is why, and this is why, and this is why. And then when there's several filters that you put this through in order to choose the best. And then you bring that back and you say, okay, what should we do about it? And you have this brainstorming session, and then you start voting on the wall, as to what you think are the most important. And you come up with 3 or 4 key things that you want to do. You see, the people of church growth, they know that no church can work on 8 things at once. And even if it's one thing, you can't tackle that in 10 different ways. You need to narrow down what you're going to do. And they find that often small changes make huge differences. And so we want to identify. And then after that, we say, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to respond? Who's going to do it? When are they going to do it? And for a whole year, we focus on that one thing. And then after a year, we take the diagnostic again, probably other people, and we see if we're stronger in that area. Now where are we weakest? And if you stick with this for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, it makes a huge difference in the life of a church. So, there's just a couple of things that people sometimes get uptight about. One is that just by going through this process, they think, oh no, they think we're sick. That's not it. Even healthy people know that there's a value to having a physical every year. And even healthy churches can be healthier. And the way they measure health is around 65%. I forget the exact figure. And if you're at 65%, they say that you are substantially healthy in that area. And if the 65 comes in comparing yourself with all the other churches that have taken this. And there's been 65,000 churches in the world that have taken it. And they compare you with other churches in the United States. And in terms of other churches, are you stronger than 65% or not? And if you're strong in all of those areas, if you're stronger than 65% in all of those areas, what they've discovered is that this church is growing. It's automatic. That's why they call it natural church development. It's not some program, but if a person, if your kid is healthy, if he's eating right and exercising right and sleeping right and so on, you can expect that he'll grow. If he doesn't grow, then there's some problem that's other. So, I like to think of this when we worked with churches that were in conflict. Things get really quite sad sometimes, really muddled in churches. And you come in and we call this ministry a ministry of restoring beauty to the bride. The church is the bride of Christ. And so we were restoring beauty to the bride. Well, for us, it's more like enhancing the beauty of the bride. It's we as individuals and we as a church that give God his reputation in the area. What kind of a reputation are we giving to God? And the more healthy we are, the better the reputation that we're giving. Now, we live in a fallen world, and we're all in process, and we're sinners, and so that'll never be perfect. But even outsiders know if we're trying. So So that's one thing that people sometimes get hung up on. Then there's other people that think when a church does something like this, they say, oh no, they're going to change everything. And that's not it at all. In reality, often a church will find that it's healthy in all these areas, but it still could, it's weakest there, and so they work on that. And what they discover is that often it's just a few small changes that make a huge difference. And so that's sort of the direction we're headed.